I woke up to the sound of my alarm clock beeping incessantly. Groggily, I reached over and smacked the snooze button, silencing the noise and groaning as I slowly sat upright in bed. Rubbing my eyes, I yawned and stretched my arms and legs, feeling the early morning stiffness in my joints. I glanced over at the clock on my bedside table and saw that it was 7 a.m. I knew I needed to get up and start my day, but I didn't feel like doing anything just yet. I lay back down on my bed, pulling the covers up over my head and snuggling into the warmth and comfort of my sheets. After a few minutes of procrastinating, I finally forced myself out of bed and stumbled towards the bathroom. I turned on the shower and waited for the water to heat up before stepping inside. The hot water cascading down my body felt heavenly, and I stood there for a moment just letting the water run over me. I then grabbed the bottle of my favorite shower gel and began lathering up, enjoying the scent of the soap and the soothing sensation of the suds on my skin. I took my time in the shower, relishing the warmth and solitude before I would have to start my day. After scrubbing my body, I turned my attention to my hair. I squeezed out a generous amount of shampoo onto my palm and began massaging it into my scalp, feeling the satisfying foam as I worked my fingers through my locks. I made sure to rinse thoroughly before moving on to the conditioner. The conditioner felt luxurious as I combed it through my hair, making it smooth and tangle-free. I stood under the spray of the water for a few more minutes, letting the conditioner do its work and enjoying the feeling of the warm water on my scalp. After letting the conditioner sit in my hair for a while, I dipped under the water to rinse it out. As the water washed over my head, I focused on the ponytail part of my hair, which was black and white striped. I made sure to rinse it thoroughly, feeling the slippery conditioner leaving my hair feeling smooth and silky. Once my hair was rinsed, I grabbed my loofah and began to wash my body again, this time paying extra attention to my armpits and nether regions. I lathered up the loofah with body wash and started scrubbing my skin, feeling the soap bubbles and foam swirling over my skin. I took my time, enjoying the feeling of being clean and refreshed as I washed away the sweat and oil that had built up overnight. I made sure to pay special attention to areas like my butt and between my toes, making sure to get every nook and cranny nice and clean. Once I was so satisfied with my scrubbing, I rinsed off the suds and turned off the water. I stepped out of the shower, grabbing a towel and wrapping it around my body. I started drying off, feeling the softness of the towel against my skin as I patted myself dry. I then went over to the sink and looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was still dripping wet, and my face was a little tired and puffy from just waking up. I picked up my toothbrush and started brushing my teeth, thinking about what my day had in store for me. I put on my small black top hat and adjusted it to the perfect angle on my head. I looked at myself in the mirror and smiled, feeling a sense of confidence and style with the hat on. Next, I put on my outfit, which was almost identical to my sister Franny's, but completely black instead of purple. I pulled the black and white striped bodysuit up my legs and over my hips, feeling the smoothness of the fabric against my skin. I then zipped up the bodysuit and adjusted the high collar around my neck, making sure it was comfortable and snug. I checked myself out in the mirror, feeling satisfied with how I looked in the black version of my sister's outfit. I then put on my black gloves, pulling them over my hands and flexing my fingers to make sure they fit snugly. Next, I slipped on my black boots, zipping them up all the way up my calves. I took a moment to buckle the belt around my waist and admire myself in the mirror. After putting on the finishing touches to my outfit, I took a moment to admire my reflection in the mirror. I decided that my nails could use a little attention, so I grabbed my bottle of red nail polish and sat down on the edge of the bathtub. I carefully applied the red nail polish to my fingernails, making sure to cover each nail completely and evenly. Once I was satisfied with the application, I waited for the pen for the dry. I then took out my nail file and started shaping my nails into a nice, even shape. I focused on making each nail symmetrical and smooth, feeling satisfied as I buffed away any rough edges or imperfections. Once my nails were all shaped and polished, I stood up and made my way out of the bathroom. My stomach growled, reminding me that I needed to eat breakfast. I made my way to the kitchen and started looking through the fridge for ingredients to make something tasty. I settled on making scrambled eggs and bacon with some noodles, I got out a frying pan and started cooking the bacon, watching as the strips sizzled and the fat rendered. Once the bacon was crispy, I transferred it onto a plate and set it aside. I then added a splash of water to the pan and poured in a beaten egg, stirring them constantly as they cooked into fluffy golden scrambled eggs. Once the eggs were cooked, I added a serving of noodles and the crispy bacon to the pan, tossing everything together and seasoning it with salt and pepper. I let the mixture cook for a few more minutes, allowing the flavors to blend together. Finally, I plated the noodles and eggs, sprinkling some cheese on top to finish it off. I admired my creation, feeling satisfied and hungry as I took a seat at the table and prepared to dig in. I took a bite of the noodles and eggs, savoring the salty, cheesy flavors that burst in my mouth. The crispy bacon added a nice crunch, and the eggs were creamy and perfectly cooked. I shoveled in another mouthful, enjoying my breakfast and feeling my hunger being satisfied. I finished up my plate, feeling satisfied and energized after a good meal. I then got up and put the pan in the sink, making a mental note to wash the dishes later. Feeling satisfied and energetic, I was ready to start my day. After breakfast, I decided to spend some time in the backyard tending to the plants and flowers. I walked outside and looked around at the garden, taking in the fresh air and the beauty of the plants and colorful blooms. I put on my gardening gloves and set to work, pulling out any weeds that had sprouted up and deadheading any faded flowers. I also checked the soil moisture levels and watered any plants that needed it. I spent a few hours in the garden, lost in the therapeutic rhythm of the tasks at hand. The sun shone down on me, and the sweet scent of flowers filled the air. I felt a sense of peace and contentment as I worked, taking satisfaction in the small improvements I was making to the garden. Finally, I stood up and surveyed my handiwork. The garden looked neat and tidy, and I felt a sense of accomplishment from the hard work I had put in. I dusted off my gloves and took a moment to admire the results of my efforts. As I stood admiring the garden, I suddenly felt a small weight on my shoulder. I turned my head and was surprised to see a tiny bird perched there, its wings fluttering rapidly as it looked at me with beady eyes. I stood completely still, not wanting to disturb a delicate creature. The hummingbird seemed unbothered by my presence and continued to sit on my shoulder, its tiny feet clutching my shirt. I marveled at its vibrantly colored feathers and its tiny, almost translucent wings. To my surprise and delight, the hummingbird then began to nuzzle its head against my cheek, its beak barely tracing my skin. I could feel the softness of its feathers and the warmth of its body as it continued to press against me. I stood there, completely mesmerized and feeling a sense of wonder at this unexpected moment of connection with this tiny creature. The hummingbird seemed to trust me and was seeking comfort from me, which felt like a special gift. I gently lifted my hand up to the hummingbird and began to pet its soft feathers. The bird seemed to enjoy the attention, closing its eyes and tilting its head to nuzzle against my hand. As I continued to pet the hummingbird, I suddenly felt a soft flutter on my other shoulder. I turned my head and saw a monarch butterfly resting there, its wings gently flapping as it surveyed its new perch. I held completely still, so as not to startle the butterfly, and observed it closely. Its wings were a beautiful combination of deep orange and black, with a subtle touch of white. It seemed completely unfazed by my presence and perched on my shoulder with a gentle weight. To my surprise, the butterfly then began to brush its wings against my cheek, its delicate touch feeling like a soft caress. I was amazed at this display of trust and affection from these tiny creatures, and smiled at the gentle gesture. I stood completely still and allowed the butterfly to continue its gentle ministrations. Its wings felt like soft, thin fabric against my skin, and I could feel the faint brush of its antennae as it explored my face. I closed my eyes and savored the moment, feeling a strange sense of connectedness and harmony with this small butterfly. The sensation of its wings against my cheek was both soothing and exhilarating, and I let out a sigh of contentment. After my magical moment with the hummingbird and butterfly, I reluctantly let them go and watched them flutter back into the garden. I stood there for a moment, feeling a sense of gratitude for the encounter, before heading back inside. As I entered the house, I made my way to the living room and flopped down on the couch in front of the TV. I grabbed the remote and started flipping through the channels, looking for something entertaining to watch. I finally settled on a reality show and curled up on the couch, snuggling into the cushions and letting myself get lost in the mindless drama unfolding on the screen. I felt relaxed and content after my time in the garden, and the familiar sounds of the TV kept me company as I zoned out. I watched the show for a little while, laughing at the ridiculous antics of the participants and shaking my head in disbelief at some of the decisions they made. I found myself getting more and more invested as the show went on, and before I knew it, I had binged several episodes. As I was absorbed in the show, the dramatic music and tense scenes were suddenly interrupted by a news report. The channel switched to live footage from a news studio, and I sat up on the couch to pay attention. The news reporter's voice was slightly shaky as they reported on the breaking news. A dangerous serial killer has escaped prison and is believed to be on the loose, the reporter stated, looking into the camera with alarmed eyes. I felt a chill run down my spine as I absorbed the news. A serial killer was on the loose, and their location was unknown. I sat up on the couch, suddenly feeling more alert and anxious. The news report went on to say that the serial killer was highly intelligent and had evaded capture by the police multiple times. This made me even more worried, as it seemed like this person was very dangerous and skilled at avoiding detection. I listened intently to the news report, trying to absorb as much information as possible about the killer. The reporter mentioned the killer's name and showed a grainy security footage of them from the prison they had escaped from. The news reporter stated that the killer's name was Daniel Hank, and his face appeared on the screen with the security footage. The image was slightly blurred, but I could still make out the killer's intense eyes and stern expression. As I looked at the security footage, I shivered involuntarily at the killer's manic smile. His eyes widened to an almost unnatural degree, making it look as if were bulging out of his head. It was a terrifying expression that sent chills down my spine. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease and anxiety at the sight of this maniacal smile. The killer's face looked unhinged, and I had a feeling that whoever this person was, they were capable of great violence and cruelty. As I listened to the news report and saw the image of Daniel Hank, I couldn't help but worry about my sisters and friends who lived nearby. Frenny, Bonfi, Chiku, Fexa, Golden, Fredina, and Marie were all in danger, as they had husbands and, in the case of Marie, children who were potential targets for this escaped killer. As I thought about the danger lurking in our neighborhood, I realized that it wasn't just my sisters and friends who were at risk. The escaped killer could target any innocent citizen. And the thought of that sent a shiver down my spine. As the magnitude of the situation sank in, I felt my anger and determination rising. I clenched my fists and stood up from the couch, feeling a burning sense of resolution. I couldn't just sit idly by while a killer was on the loose, potentially targeting my loved ones and other victims. As I stood up from the couch, I made a decision. I was determined to do whatever I could to help the police force capture Daniel Hanks. I couldn't just sit back and hope they caught him. I had to take action to protect my sisters and friends, including the ones with children. I quickly grabbed my phone and started Googling information about the police investigation and how I could assist. I scrolled through news articles and social media, searching for any information on how I could help capture Hanks. Then suddenly, I remembered something important. I had a superpower myself. I could use my sonar scanner sense to locate people. I had completely forgotten about it until now, but this ability could be incredibly useful in finding the escape killer. I quickly gathered my thoughts and focused my senses, using my sonar scanner ability to try to pick up any signs of Daniel Hank's location. I closed my eyes and concentrated, trying to tune into any signals or vibrations in the air that could indicate where he was. As I focused my power, the world around me faded away, and I saw colorful vibrations and sound waves dance on my mental eye. I tried to pick up anything that might lead me to Daniel Hank's location, filtering out the usual sounds and disturbances of the city. In my mental eye, I saw Daniel Hanks driving west on the highway outside the city in his getaway van. The image was clear and distinct, and I could see the van clearly in my mind's eye. I quickly focused on the image and committed it to memory, feeling a sense of relief and excitement that I had a lead on the killer's location. I opened my eyes and quickly grabbed my keys and wallet, feeling a surge of adrenaline and determination. Ano ba ma? Ang wala makuwi kalahikuduman gabalian. I hurried out the door and into my car, starting the engine and speeding off in the direction of the highway. As I was about to start driving, I suddenly realized that I had no idea if Daniel Hanks was armed or not, and I didn't have any weapons to defend myself. I slammed on the brakes and sat in my car, feeling a sense of panic and an uncertainty. Then I couldn't go after the killer without protection, but I didn't know where to get any weapons quickly. Just as I was about to lose hope, I realized that I was parked next to a weapons store. The shop was small and had a guns and ammo sign above the door, and I knew immediately that I had a chance to get some weapons to protect myself. I quickly unbuckled my seatbelt and hopped out of the car, ran to the shop and entering it as quickly as I could. The interior was filled with all types of guns and ammo, and I could see several other customers browsing the selection. I quickly looked around, trying to decide which weapon would be best for my needs. I wasn't very experienced with guns, but I needed something that would be effective in a fight. I gravitated towards a revolver, feeling like it would be easy to use and powerful enough to protect myself. After looking at the selection of pistols, I decided on a black Glock 19 handgun. It was one of my favorites and I'd had some experience with it, so I felt comfortable handling it. I also grabbed a rifle, feeling like I might need something with longer range in case Hanks decided to run. After making my selection, I quickly went up to the counter to pay for the weapons. The cashier looked up at me and raised an eyebrow at my choices, but I just handed over my credit card and waited for the transaction to go through. As I waited, I felt a sense of anticipation and anxiety. I knew that I had the weapons I needed, but I also didn't have a clear plan of what to do when I found Hanks. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my racing mind as I waited for the cashier to finish the transaction. As I waited for my weapons, I decided that the best course of action would be to be stealthy. I had a particular ability to blend into the shadows and disappear in the darkness, so I figured it would be best to use that to my advantage. Instead of charging in head-on, I would wait and watch for the perfect moment to attack. I would use my ability to move silently and stay hidden, waiting until Hanks was alone and vulnerable before making my move. After paying for the weapons and ammo, I quickly loaded them into the trunk of my car and slammed the lid shut. I felt a sense of readiness and determination, knowing that I had the tools I needed to take down Daniel Hanks. I quickly got back into the driver's seat and started the engine, feeling the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I knew that I was now armed and ready to confront the escaped killer, but I also knew that I had to be careful and strategic in my approach. I revved the engine and slammed on the gas, feeling the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I raced towards the highway. I knew that I was about to confront danger and face off against a dangerous killer, but I couldn't back down now. As I sped down the road towards the highway, I focused my mind and prepared myself mentally for the task ahead. I had no idea what to expect when I found Hanks, but I knew that I had to keep my wits about me and be ready for anything. Finally, the exit to the highway came into view. I hit the off-ramp at high speed, swerving onto the main road. The traffic was moderate, but I was able to maneuver through it quickly, keeping an eye on my surroundings for any signs of Daniel Hanks's van. As I continued driving down the highway, I decided to put my car on autopilot so that I could focus on using my sonar scanner sense to try to locate Hanks's van. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, focusing my senses on the world around me. Again, I saw colorful vibrations and sound waves dancing around my mind, the chaotic patterns of a city surrounding me. As I concentrated on my ability, I suddenly saw Hank's van in my mind's eye. The colorful vibration sound waves coalesced into the image of the van, and I could see it clearly in my mental eye. However, I also realized that he was many miles ahead of me and on the outskirts of town. He was still on the run and had a head start on me. I felt a twinge of anxiety as I saw how far ahead Hanks was, but I didn't let it slow me down. I increased my speed and weaved through traffic, trying to close the distance between us as quickly as possible. As I continued my pursuit, I noticed the police car passing me on the highway. It was clear that the police were also on the hunt for Daniel Hanks, but I knew that, if they weren't careful, he would quickly evade them like he had done so many times before. I felt a chill run down my spine as I thought about the possibility of Hanks attacking the police. From the news reports, it was clear that he was dangerous and unpredictable, and if he felt threatened, I wouldn't past him to open fire on the innocent officers. I suddenly had an idea to get the officers' attention. I quickly maneuvered my car next to the police car and honked my horn, trying to signal to the officers to look my way. I saw the officers turn their heads towards me, probably wondering what I was doing. I quickly gestured for them to roll down their window so I could talk to them. As soon as the officers rolled down their window, I quickly started speaking, trying to relay the information I had on Hank's location. "I know where Daniel Hanks is," I said urgently, speaking as quickly as I could. "He's on the highway outside of town, maybe a few miles ahead. I can show you his exact location." I quickly continued, warning the officers to stay behind me and be careful in their approach. "He's dangerous and unpredictable. If he sees you coming, he'll probably try to evade or worse, attack. Let me lead the way. I can help you corner him." The officers seemed to be listening intently, and I could see them talking amongst themselves for a moment. Then, after a few moments, they turned back to me and nodded, agreeing to let me lead the way. I felt a surge of relief and determination as the officers agreed to let me lead the way. I knew that with their help, we might just have a chance of cornering Hanks and bringing him in. With the police car following behind me, I started speeding down the highway, focused on leading them to Hank's van. I kept my eyes peeled, looking for any sign of the van in the distance. The seconds ticked by as I continued down the highway, checking my rear-view mirror, occasionally, to make sure the police car was still behind me. I could feel the tension building as we drew closer and closer to Hank's location. I refocused my mind and used my sonar scanner sense again to check on Hanks's location. I closed my eyes for a moment, tuning into the vibrations and sound waves around me. In my mind's eye, I saw Hanks pull off the highway onto a dirt road. The image was clear and distinct, and I knew that he was changing direction to try and lose any pursuers. I quickly opened my eyes and changed lanes, signaling to the police officers behind me to follow my lead. I exited the highway onto the dirt road, staying focused and determined to catch up to Hanks. The dirt road was bumpy and narrow, and I had to slow down a bit to keep from losing control of the car. The dirt road was bumpy and narrow, and I had to slow down a bit to keep from losing control of the car. I could see the police car behind me following closely, their sirens off to avoid alerting Hanks of their presence. The dirt road twisted and turned through the countryside, and I had to keep a steady hand on the wheel to stay on track. I could see the van up ahead, kicking up dust as it raced through the dirt road. It was clear that Hanks had intentionally chosen this road to try to evade any pursuers. The dusty terrain and twisty road made it difficult to follow him, but I was determined not to lose sight of the van. As we continued down the dirt road, we suddenly saw a small house come into view in the distance. It was secluded and isolated, obviously in the middle of nowhere. I slowed the car to a stop, signaling for the police car to do the same. We waited and watched, trying to figure out what Hanks was up to. From what I could tell, the house looked deserted and abandoned, but I had a feeling that Hanks was using it as a hideout. As I watched from the car, I saw Hanks get out of the van, taking note of his appearance. He was wearing a black beanie hat, a gray t-shirt and black jeans, and he had that same manic smile on his face, his eyes wide and maniacal. Even from a distance, I could see that his teeth were oddly large and jagged. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I saw his face. He looked like a man possessed, like a rabid animal that had been let loose. It was clear that he was dangerous and unstable, and I could see the police officers behind me bracing themselves, their hands on their guns. I watched as Hanks grabbed a gun from the van and disappeared into the house. Something about his movement seemed off, like he was on edge and ready to snap at any moment. The police officers behind me were also watching with rapt attention, their hands still on their guns. It was clear that we were all on high alert, waiting to see what Hanks would do next. I closed my eyes and focused on my sonar scanner sense again, trying to get a better look at what Hanks was doing in the house. I tuned into the sounds and vibrations around me, trying to get a mental picture of his actions inside the house. As my ability kicked in, I Hanks inside the house with a woman who seemed to have the same manic expression as him. They were embracing each other tightly, and I could feel the intensity and insanity coming from them both. As I watched the two of them together, it suddenly hit me that this must be Hank's crazy girlfriend, the one who had apparently helped him escape from prison. The thought sent a chill down my spine. Two insane killers together, both fueled by their twisted love for each other. I couldn't imagine how dangerous they must be together, both of them feeding off each other's madness and violence. I realized that we needed to be extra careful in approaching them, as they were probably both armed and volatile. I watched as Hanks and his crazy girlfriend walked into a room, still embracing each other tightly. They disappeared from my line of sight, and I couldn't see what they were doing in there. I increased my sonar scanner sense, trying to get a better glimpse of what was happening inside the room. I focused all my energy on the sounds and vibrations coming from the house, trying to pick up even the faintest hint of what was going on in there. I was horrified to see that Hanks and his girlfriend were torturing an innocent person in the room. The person was tied up to a chair, looking terrified and in pain. Despite her better senses, she couldn't help but feel disgusted at Seeing the danger the victim was in, I knew that now was the time to act. I signaled to the police officers behind me to stay where they were and wait for my signal. Then I quietly stepped out of my car. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins as I prepared to confront Hanks and his girlfriend. Armed with my gun, I moved stealthily towards the house, trying to stay out of sight. I took cover behind trees and bushes, using the darkness as camouflage. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I crept closer and closer to the house. I could hear voices coming from inside the house, likely Hanks and his girlfriend, talking about the person they'd captured. I clenched my gun tightly, steeling myself for the confrontation that was about to come. I carefully entered the house, moving silently so as not to alert Hanks or his girlfriend to my presence. The air inside the house was thick with tension and madness, and I could hear the sounds of the tortured person moaning in pain. I stayed close to the wall, sticking to the shadows as I crept further into the house. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I tried to stay focused and calm. I could hear the voices of Hanks and his girlfriend getting louder as I approached the room they were in. I could see Hanks and his girlfriend inside the room now, both of them fully engaged in torturing the person they had captured. They hadn't noticed my presence yet, and I knew that I had the element of surprise on my side. I took a deep breath and entered the room silently, staying in the shadows where they wouldn't see me. I could see Hanks and his girlfriend, their backs turned to me as they continued to torment their victim. I felt a surge of anger seeing them torture the poor person, but I tried to stay focused and control my emotions. I knew that I had the advantage of surprise, and I needed to make the most of it. At the right moment, I took aim and fired my gun, shooting the machetes out of Hanks and his girlfriend's hands. The sudden act caught them off guard, and they both froze for a moment, clearly shocked and confused by the interruption. I could see the look of surprise and disbelief on their faces as they turned to look at me. They hadn't expected anyone to find them out here, and they certainly hadn't expected a surprise attack like this. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I jumped out of the darkness and tackled Hanks and his girlfriend to the ground. I let out a loud, monstrous roar as I did so, trying to catch them both off guard and overpower them. I could feel their bodies tense and struggle beneath me, but I was too strong for them both. They were yelling and flailing, trying to break free, but I kept them pinned down with all my strength. I quickly handcuffed them both, making sure that they couldn't get away. Hanks and his girlfriend were both struggling against the cuffs, their faces full of anger and frustration. I quickly turned to victim, who was clearly traumatized and shaken by the experience. I undid the rope binding them to the chair and helped them to stand up, making sure they didn't injure themselves further. The person was trembling and shaking, both from physical and emotional trauma. I could see the fear and pain in their eyes, and I knew that they needed medical attention as soon as possible. I quickly called the two officers from outside into the house to help take the victim to safety. They rushed into the room and quickly assessed the situation, before carefully escorting the person out to the car to get medical attention. I turned my attention back to Hanks and his girlfriend, who were both lying on the floor handcuffed. They were both glaring at me with a mixture of anger and hatred, clearly furious at being captured. I couldn't resist the urge to give them a taste of their own medicine, so I slapped both Hanks and his girlfriend hard across the face. They both let out cries of pain and surprise, clearly not expecting the physical violence. I led both Hanks and his girlfriend out of the house and over to my car, throwing them roughly into the trunk. They struggled and cursed at me, but there was nothing they could do with the cuffs on. I quickly slammed the trunk shut, feeling a sense of satisfaction at seeing them trapped inside. They were both still yelling and swearing at me, but the sound was muffled through the metal. I turned to the two officers and told them to take the victim to the hospital and get them checked out as soon as possible. Once the victim was safely in the police car, I turned my attention back to my own task. I knew that I had to get Hanks and his girlfriend back to the prison as soon as possible, and that the officers would handle the medical situation for the victim. I slid into the driver's seat of the car and started the engine, pulling out of the dirt road and heading back towards the city. The sky was starting to turn dark as I made my way back to the prison. I pulled into the prison parking lot and parked the car, then got out and strode over to the trunk. I could hear Hanks and Carla Smith yelling and cursing at me from inside the trunk, their voices muffled by the metal. I opened the trunk and firmly grabbed them both by the shoulders, pulling them out of the car roughly. They were both handcuffed and struggling, but I was stronger than they were and easily kept them under control. As I marched them into the prison, the guards and officers inside started clapping and cheering, clearly impressed by my capture of the two dangerous criminals. Some of them gave me high fives and slaps on the back, clearly happy that I brought Hanks and his girlfriend in. Despite the accolades, I knew that I hadn't done it for the praise. I had done it because it was my duty and responsibility, and because I wanted to make sure that the duo would be punished for their crimes. I continued to lead Hanks and Carla Smith through the prison, past the rows of other inmates who were all watching us and shouting out comments. Some of them were calling out insults towards Hanks and Carla, clearly not fans of the two criminals. Unceremoniously threw both Hanks and Carla Smith into a cell together, making sure that they were properly locked inside before closing the door after them. They were both still cursing and screaming at me, but I ignored them as I turned away from the cell. With Hanks and Carla locked up, I took a moment to breathe and collect myself. I was exhausted from the chase and the fight, but was also satisfied that I had delivered the two of them back to the prison and justice. As I turned back to face the other guards and officers, I was met with more cheering and applause. They were all clearly impressed and appreciative of my efforts in capturing Hanks and Carla Smith. The police chief strode into the room, a big smile on his face. He approached me and shook my hand firmly, clearly impressed and proud of my accomplishment. The police chief thanked me profusely for my help in recapturing Daniel Hanks and his accomplice. He praised my skills and my bravery, clearly impressed by my ability to track the criminals down and bring them in alive. The police chief then made a surprising offer. Since I wasn't technically a member of the police force, he told me that I would be accepted into the force and then given my own badge and position. He praised my skills as a fighter and my tracking abilities, saying that my help would be an asset in the future. I was taken aback by the offer, but I accepted it without hesitation. I was honored and humbled to be given a position on the police force, and I knew that it would give me the authority to help people and bring criminals to justice. With my new badge and position in hand, I thanked the police chief and promised to keep up the good work in the future. I was excited at the prospect of working alongside other officers and using my skills to help others. As I looked around the room, I could see the other officers and guards giving me approving looks, clearly happy to have me as part of the team. I knew that with my help, we could make a real difference in the city and protect innocent people from dangerous criminals. I was surprised to see that even the other prisoners in the cell blocks were clapping and smiling at me as well. I had expected them to taunt and jeer at me, but instead they were actually acknowledging and respecting my accomplishments. After the celebration and applause, the attention turned back to Hanks and Carla Smith, who were still locked up in their cell. Now that they had been recaptured, it was time for them to face justice. And unfortunately for them, they were going to be put on death row for their crimes. I led Hanks and Carla Smith out of their cell and down the hall to the execution room. They were both silent now, knowing that their time was running out and that they were about to face the ultimate punishment. The other officers and guards watched as we passed, some of them looking grim and others looking satisfied. I shoved Hanks and Carla Smith into the cold metal chairs in the execution room, the sound of the chains echoing off the walls. The chairs were specially designed to securely hold prisoners in place while they waited for their execution, making it impossible for them to escape. Next, the mechanical wrist restraints on the chairs closed with a clang, securely holding Hanks and Carla in place. Then, the chest restraint closed with a snap, trapping them and making it impossible for them to move. They were both struggling again, but there was nothing they could do now to escape their fate. As I was making sure that Hanks and Carla was secured in their chairs, I heard the sound of a terrifying whirring noise coming from behind me. When I turned around, I saw that the Torture Freddy mask from the Five Nights at Freddy's movie had activated, its eyes glowing red and its jaws creaking as it came to life. I quickly moved out of the way as the terrifying Freddy mask slowly rolled towards Hanks and Carla, its blade spinning fast with a menacing sound. I noticed that the police force had taken the famous Freddy Fazbear mask from the movie and modified it, using it specifically for the most dangerous criminals. The sound of the blades getting closer to Hanks and Carla's faces was almost unbearably loud, and I could see the fear and panic in their eyes as the mask continued to approach. I took several more steps back, not wanting to get too close in case the mask decided to turn on me. Hanks and Carla Smith struggled in their chairs as the fearsome mask continued to approach them, desperately trying to escape but finding it impossible due to the restraints. The whirring sound of the mask's blades was getting closer and closer to their faces, making it clear that their time was running out. As the mask slowly made its way closer and closer to them, Hanks and Carla couldn't help but whimper and scream in terror. They were both trying to push back against the chair, but it was futile against the restraints and the sheer terror that they were experiencing. The blades of the mask were now only inches away from Hanks and Carla's faces, the sound of the spinning blades ringing in their ears. They were both crying and begging for mercy, but there was no mercy to be given to them in this situation. The Freddy mask was now so close to their faces that he was almost touching them, the blades just barely not making contact with their skin. They were both crying and shaking violently, too scared even to make a sound. I couldn't bear to watch, so I covered my eyes with my hands and shut them tight, trying to block out the scene before me. But even with my eyes closed, I could hear the terrified screams and cries of Hanks and Carla. In addition to the screams, I could hear a strange grinding sound coming from the mask, which I knew meant that the blades of the mask had made contact. Along with the screams and the grinding sound, I could also hear the chairs that Hanks and Carla were in convulsive and rattle in their pain. The sound of the chairs shuddering and rattling was almost deafening, adding to the cacophony of sounds that filled the room. I kept my eyes tightly shut, unable to watch what was happening, but still being able to hear it all too. After what felt like an eternity, the noise finally stopped, its swearing and grinding noises suddenly going silent. I cautiously opened my eyes, but I still didn't remove my hands from my face. After the execution was over, guards came into the room and started unbinding Hank's and Carla's bodies from the chairs, taking care to keep them in the restraints to prevent any further accidents. Their limp bodies were then carefully moved to the morgue. I watched quietly as the bodies were taken away, no longer feeling any sympathy for the criminals who had caused so much pain and terror in the city. As their bodies were taken away, I knew that justice, and that they could never hurt anyone again. I stood and watched as the guards began cleaning up the mess left behind, sweeping away the dust and wiping away the blood spatter. As the room was gradually returned to its normal state, I turned and left the room, feeling a sense of closure and satisfaction as I did so. As I walked down the halls to the exit, I was greeted again by applause and cheers from the other officers and guards. They all seemed genuinely happy to have me on the team and were showing their appreciation for my work. I finally made it to my car and got inside, feeling both exhausted and satisfied from the eventful day. I started the engine and headed home, looking forward to some rest and relaxation after the day's excitement. As I drove home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction and happiness. I had helped bring dangerous criminals to justice and was now a member of the police force, where I could continue to use my skills and talents to make a difference. Despite the gruesome sight that I had witnessed in the execution room, I knew that justice had been served and that the city was safer now. It was a strange feeling, knowing that I had just seen criminals get executed, but it was also a satisfying one. I had done my duty and helped ensure that danger and evil were taken care of, and that was all that mattered in the end. I couldn't help but feel a little disturbed by the fact that the police force had actually taken the Torture Freddy machine from the Five Nights at Freddy's movie and used it as an execution device for only the most dangerous criminals. It was a bit shocking to know that this fictional piece of machinery had been incorporated into real-life justice. Despite the unsettling fact that the police force had used a fictional piece of machinery, I couldn't help but feel satisfied that Hanks and Carla had suffered before their deaths. It felt like they had gotten what they deserved for their crimes, and that justice had been served. As I drove, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction in knowing that they were burning in the fiery pits of hell. The thought of their punishment and the justice had been served made me happy and content. But as I drove, I also found my mind wandering to what my future on the police force would hold. Would the police force be using the Torture Freddy machine more often? Would I see more executions in the future? Only time would tell. After a bit more driving, I finally arrived home. The house was quiet and peaceful, a stark contrast to the noise and chaos of the police station. I got out of the car, feeling tired and satisfied from the day's events. I walked up to the front door, pulled out my keys, and unlocked it, stepping inside the cool and quiet interior of my home. It was a relief to be in the familiar surroundings of my own home after the intense day. After heating up some leftovers and eating dinner, I felt like I needed a nice hot shower to relax and unwind. I went to the bathroom and turned on the water, letting it heat up as I undressed. As I got into the shower, I felt the hot water run over my body, relaxing my tired muscles and washing away the stress of the day. It was a simple pleasure, but one that I greatly appreciated. I used some shower gel and a loofah to wash my body, enjoying the feeling of the hot water and the smooth feeling of the loofah on my skin. I took my time, relaxing under the spray and letting the water wash away any lingering tension. After I was finished washing my body, I grabbed a bottle of shampoo and started washing my hair, massaging my scalp and enjoying the suds as they dripped down my shoulders. Once my hair was washed, I rinsed it off thoroughly and turned off the water. I grabbed a towel from a nearby rack and dried myself off, feeling refreshed and rejuvenated after the shower. Feeling clean and refreshed, I put on my favorite pair of head pajamas, sliding under the covers and snuggling down into my pillow. The comfort of my own bed was a welcome change after the day's events. I closed my eyes and felt my body relax, finally giving in to the well-earned sleep that was calling to me. As I drifted off, I couldn't help but smile, feeling content and fulfilled after the day's successes. The last things on my mind before I drifted off were of the successful capture of Hanks and Carla, the approval of my fellow officers and guards, and a glimpse into what my future role in the police force might hold. With these thoughts swirling in my mind, I finally succumbed to sleep, my body sinking deeper and deeper into the comfortable embrace of darkness. I slowly drifted off to sleep, my body and mind finally getting the rest they needed after such an eventful day. As I slowly fell into a deep sleep, the world faded away and my thoughts were quiet. I felt myself sinking deeper and deeper into the blissful world of sleep, my body and mind completely relaxed and at ease. The events of the day replayed in my mind one last time before my thoughts slowly started to fade.